Welcome back to the second part of tonight's France 24 debate devoted to the attempt launched today to recapture Ramadi, the capital of Anbar province in Iraq. We're discussing the war of words that has erupted even as that battle gets underway on the ground between Washington, Baghdad and Tehran about who was responsible for the fall of the town. To begin with, I'm going to pick up from where we just left off a moment ago, if I may, with you, Alain Cavall. Two points, really. First of all, about the failings of the withdrawing American forces after the 2003 invasion, and then perhaps its failure to take on with its coalition ISIS effectively. It could be the first point that was just made a moment ago by our last guest, that as it withdrew, in its haste to withdraw, American forces failed to anticipate the kind of chaos they were leaving behind, despite the warnings, despite the things that were flagged up by a number of people.
Yes, that's true. At the time of the occupation, the American forces had set up some Sunni forces which were supposed to be able to fight against the predecessors of ISIS. And when they withdrawn, these forces melted, and the government in Baghdad did not make a use of it or abandoned them. And so some of the leaders went back to the Sunni insurrection that we call now, insurgency, sorry, that we call now ISIS. And this failure is in a ridiculously short amount of time showed the inability of Washington to get ready for that.
A failure of understanding. Julien Theron, one of our viewers, sending in this tweet: America's big mistake was to fail to see the Sunni-Shia problem. They say, and to ensure a fair government, American and Russian meddling cannot help. There was a failure to grasp the complexity of the situation on the ground, the divides that existed, and as our guest just said, the corruption that was endemic in the government, in the Iraqi government they were leaving behind.
Yes, and actually the mistakes, you said that, come from 2003, actually, when they released the Iraqi army, and that mainly Sunni officers went with their weapons and so on to their homes. So the troubles start here, and even Saddam Hussein actually played on the communities and so on. When the Americans left Iraq, it was a completely sectarian country already, and now we have, it's not a very big surprise that the militias are actually sectarian militias, with a very good algorithm and so on. So they're very good fighters. I think I was speaking to Janine Di Giovanni, a reporter for Newsweek in Baghdad, and she said that globally speaking, the Iraqis are happy that some people actually take care of them against ISIS. But the trouble is that those militias called the Popular Mobilization Forces, or Hasid in Arabic, they are actually purely Shia and trained, like I said, by Iran. And they're very harsh. I mean, in Amerli and in Tikrit, there has been some extrajudiciary killings and looting and so on. And it's not a surprise if they chose Hussein, even if it's just symbolic. But on the ground, they really defend some Shia interests. So when they take a city, actually, there's some troubles after in this city. And Ramadi is a Sunni, mainly Sunni city. What is important, and I think that, Alan, you said that, but a lot of Sunnis are actually against ISIS. So it's very important not to send them toward ISIS. I know that there was a part of the Sunnis in Ramadi who fought against ISIS along with the Iraqi army to prevent the advance of ISIS, the city to be taken. So when another sectarian militia arrives, well, then it turns the people not to the global national unity, but to the sectarian situation. So it's globally nefast.
On the question of the American withdrawal and what it left behind, what do you believe, William Jordan, is the responsibility that weighs on American shoulders today about what's happening in Iraq?
Well, let me take that question as a way to sort of offer a couple of correctives or a couple of points that I think need to be made and stressed very hard in all of this. I mean, I agree with most of what people have said up until now, including the appalling lack of any kind of reflection by the United States going back to the fundamental mistakes it made in invading Iraq in the first place, and in the manner in which it implemented certainly the initial phases of the occupation. But the problem, one of the key problems with everything that has followed from the tragic invasion of Iraq is that the way the United States tried to administer Iraq and tried to set Iraq on a course where it would ultimately be on its own and would allow the United States to scale back, if not completely withdraw from the country, was fundamentally flawed in the sense that there was no way the United States, taking into account what it well understood in terms of the ethno-sectarian divisions within the country, there was no way the United States could engineer a peaceful and functional Iraqi government under those circumstances, absent some sort of a great national will that, given everything that was broken by the American invasion and unleashed by the American invasion, there was no way that unless the Iraqis were prepared to do that and enter onto some new national project, that it was going to succeed. And when you come to the whole question of the failure, the supposed failure of President Obama, which I would have to extend back to President George W. Bush, to negotiate successfully some kind of a residual American presence in Iraq, then the failure and the breakdown of those negotiations was not because of a lack of willingness on the part of the United States to remain in some form or fashion, but it was the Iraqis themselves who refused under any circumstances. The government, the legally elected government of the day, whatever you want to say about it in terms of its flaws and its sectarian makeup, rejected that prospect. And I mean, I could have seen it, knowing what I know about Iraq, a mile away, given the problems the British had historically trying to negotiate similar arrangements with previous Iraqi governments shortly after the formation of Iraq. But nevertheless, Iraqis, this is where, in terms of the leadership issue, in terms of Iraqi leadership failings, Iraqis, in a way, have to own up to their responsibility for a lot of this. And in the United States, American politicians who are trying to take political advantage against President Obama and any future Democratic candidate have to own up to the historical facts and take into account what actually happened from 2008 to 2011 during the time period when we tried to negotiate these arrangements.
Looking ahead now, looking at the present, if you will, Dr. Abbas Kadim, the first point you made was about the American-led coalition today and its failings. It's a point that's been made, of course, in the last 24 hours by the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani that the American-led coalition should have done much more than it did to protect Ramadi from the hands of the Islamic State organization. How much more do you believe the American-led coalition should be doing, could be doing, from the air to protect cities like Ramadi?
As much as it takes to defeating ISIS, that's what it is. If people cannot have it both ways. Once they give us ISIS in the number of a few thousands, and then all of these countries that are coming with all of their armies and arsenals, and a bunch of people on pickup trucks cannot be tackled, that is not a solid argument to somehow justify or explain failure militarily. So yes, the question is, if you are fighting an enemy and if you are making a coalition as big as it is, you need to assemble enough force to defeating this. It is not for me to say how many times you should go and bomb. It is for the commanders on in these war rooms to say, here is a city or here is a group of people who are violent and we need to defeat them. And here are the assets that we need to do it. But to send 10, 15 air raids, that is not fighting a war of this kind of magnitude. The other issue here also, we have to look at the question of, again, the coordination. The United States, and I think our leadership here in Washington, seems to be listening to the wrong people. Some kind of talk about the Hashid, just like what we heard from the other guest minutes ago, that these people are out there to do extrajudicial killings and lootings, etc. Well, with all due respect, the people of Anbar beg to differ with you. They are the ones from their elected council in Anbar to the leaders of the tribes. have insisted on and begged the prime minister to send the Hashd to get them out of the hands of ISIS. And yes, what is being said here and what is being said elsewhere, and even in Washington, is really reiteration of what the disgruntled sheikhs, who are one hand in the with the so-called peace, and the other hand with ISIS and with terrorism, and they are sitting in Erbil or in Amman and saying all of these things. Yes, the Hashd is a paramilitary group. Yes, you are expecting to see problems when they enter in the battle, but they are not to be equated with what ISIS has been doing. They are not to be. I mean, the talk about Tikrit and the extra. The Reuters, which had the article about the extrajudicial killings, cited one. In that case, the looting, so, Agence France Presse talks about what, some toothpaste and shampoo, and this. The politicians from Erbil talking about stealing refrigerators. It takes more money to transport a refrigerator from Tikrit to the south than to buy a brand new one in any market in the south. This is the kind of things. I think the Hashd has been demonized by so many people, and let's remember, these are people we talk to, we know. I lived 24 years in Iraq, and I still have those connections, speaking with Iraqis every day. Those in the Hashd who came through the fatwa of Grand Ayatollah Sistani have nothing to do with Iran. In fact, much of the Hashd is involved in units that are Iraqi forces. The Iraqi divisions are running at 50% capacity, and their balance of it to turn it to fighting capability of 70% or so is augmented by the Hashd. So all of that, I think people are inaccurately talking about this. I think the people of Ramadi know much better about what the Hashd is or is not doing, and that's why they went and invited the Hashd. I am as concerned about Iranian meddling as anybody else, but believe me, if it is not for the Hashd, Baghdad would have been the capital of ISIS long time ago, and we need to stop this kind of inaccurate punditry that is taking us nowhere, and that is in fact skewing the views in Washington, skewing the views in the region. And if you go back to the coalition, what is the coalition? In fact, it's the United States. Most of the regional coalition members, the Gulf states especially, are the supporters of terrorism financially from the ideology that ISIS fights with, comes directly from the mosque of Saudi Arabia and from the textbooks of Saudi Arabia. And the fighters who are coming, most of them are coming from these coalition countries. It's like bringing Al Capone to fight organized crime.
Al-Ankaval, I'd like to put to you the idea that perhaps because Washington's not listening to the right people, perhaps because visions are skewed, as we've just heard, it has not conducted its campaign as it should have. If we could have a look, perhaps quickly, while we talk, at the latest map, the map being redrawn, in fact, by the Islamic State militants across Iraq and Syria. The story, Al-Ankaval, of the last week or so has been the story of ISIS advances in both Iraq and Syria, and of the failure of the American-led coalition. There's no question.
Yes, indeed. We've seen that, just a fact, the simple fact, we know all the border crossings between Syria and Iraq are either in the hands of ISIS or, except for one, in the hand of the Kurds. So it seems that it means that neither the Syrian government nor the Iraqi government controls any of these border crossings, which shows how much this map is being redrawn at the moment. So yes, of course there is a failure in containing ISIS, and of course there is, but the most important question is what to do afterwards, like politically. Of course, it's a military question, but at the end, I mean, this war can last forever, of course, but it will last forever if we don't find a real political frame of thinking.
Well, I would go further to say it's not just a political question in the future; it's a political question now. And I think this is, if you talk about, what is fueling the Islamic State and its apparently rapid movement in all directions. It's what's going on, as we've been talking about. It's the failure of leadership. It's the failure of good governance. It's the failure of the promise of trying to make something better out of an admittedly tragic and unfortunate situation brought on by the Americans in Baghdad, as well as in Syria, the failure of the Bashar al-Assad regime to come to terms with and to be willing to accommodate the legitimate and originally peacefully expressed demands of a significant portion of the people for change, reform, and for something other than the repression that they were living under. What we have is, a military, what has become a very clear cut in the minds of the members of the so-called coalition, a very clear cut battle against, the Islamic State, but that is not a substitute for continuing to deal with the underlying political issues and problems that allowed the Islamic State in the first place not merely to form, but to take hold and to expand at the rate that it has.
Indeed. The question to Zaid al-Ali, now that the map of the two countries has been withdrawn, now that, according to the observatory, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the Islamic State organization holds a third of Syria, huge parts of Iraq as well, so many of the border crossings, as you mentioned, now that the map has essentially been redrawn by them, what can be done to prevent their advance or to push them back?
I mean, the answer to that question is a military one. I mean, what should be done to stop them from advancing is by regrouping Iraq's forces and leading a competent fighting force against them on the ground. There isn't much else that can be done at this stage. That's in the short term, and I don't think anyone else will give you a different answer.
It is in the hands of Baghdad rather than the American-led coalition.
Well, it's in the hands of everyone. I mean, everyone should be involved in this fight. It's not only Baghdad's problem, obviously. It's not a problem that Baghdad created, and it's not a problem that Baghdad alone has to deal with. It's something that everyone should be dealing with. So the United States should be involved, obviously, because they're partly responsible for this as well. And as Abbas referred to earlier, the Gulf countries also have to make a serious effort to try to curb support and movements in favor of ISIS on the ground. Can I just say also, just to second some of what Abbas said earlier about the Hashd not being this marauding pro-Iranian force on the ground. I mean, clearly that image of the Hashd on the ground is clearly misplaced, and people should really stop making using that type of description. The idea that they're all pro-Iranian, that they're all controlled by Tehran, and that they're all just involved in extrajudicial killings is clearly wrong. I can't remember the last time there was a serious report about extrajudicial killings by the Hashd. But what I should say at the same time is, because many people don't really know what happened in Tikrit after the liberation, is that since the liberation of Tikrit from ISIS around about 6 weeks ago, the city today remains a ghost town, right? And we don't know exactly how bad property destruction is, but around about a quarter, if not more, of houses in Tikrit have been destroyed since the liberation. And that's really a major problem that people have to come to terms with. Because of course, if what Abbas says is true, that many people in Ramadi are welcoming the Hashd, so on and so forth, they would be more enthusiastic and they would be more supportive of the Hashd if Tikritis had been allowed to go home at this stage. And to this day, not a single person has been allowed to go home to Tikrit yet. And that really needs to be resolved as soon as possible, because it's really hampering the fight against ISIS. People would be much more enthusiastic than they already are in welcoming the Hashd and supporting their efforts.
Part of the problem, as Zaid al-Ali just reminded us, is that this is a problem for everyone. It is a regional problem, it is an international problem, and it is a number of actors who are being brought together to deal with it that do not have terribly good relations.
Well, that's the point. It's a regional question. So we can speak about what is happening in the south of Iraq, or up the north, or in Kobane, or in southern Syria, or what. But it's a regional trouble, and I completely get along with what the French military chief of staff said, that against ISIS, we can have a very good military strategy, but it's not enough. We have to fight with communication and political solutions. So I completely agree with you when you said that it's about politics now. We have to bring something. Otherwise, we will just recreate the failure of Afghanistan, meaning striking from the air. And in this case, we do not have even boots on the ground. So it's not from our countries. And there's a lot of different forces on the ground. And we think that we can solve the solution from the air. It's not. I mean, the soldiers can't win politically a situation like that.
Well, but it's political in the sense that these problems are all rooted in these individual countries. It has become a regional problem because the Islamic State has become the common denominator, and it has become the pretext by which this coalition, trying to wage some sort of a half-assed military campaign, has come around. But fundamentally, what you're talking about are very distinct and very different political problems in Iraq that have to be worked out, as well as very distinct and very important political problems that have to be worked out in Syria. But the international community has to become involved in all of this. It cannot really, I think, afford to do so regionally because there are different factors and different dynamics in play. However, you know, in terms of the coalition, and I agree that there has to be a complete rethinking of this whole idea about the air campaign and everything else within the ranks of the coalition, simply because it's not really working. And the United States, for one, has to go back to rethink everything that it is unfortunately learned over the years from World War II all the way through Vietnam and into the present era about civilian casualties. You cannot successfully wage a military campaign without putting civilians at risk. And I think that the coalition partners need to talk to the United States seriously about all of this. And if the United States is not prepared to take a lot of these risks itself, then they should be the ones who step forward and provide the additional air sorties to do that.
On which point, I'm afraid we're going to have to take a quick break and welcome Emma James for a look at Media Watch. Emma James joins us now, and you're going to tell us a little bit about what's being said on social media about that war of words we've been discussing tonight between the United States, Iraq, but also Tehran about the fall of Ramadi.
Yes, absolutely. There's been quite a great deal of surprise at the undiplomatic turn of events here, because it is quite unusual for such unguarded comments to come out in such a public way. One tweet that I noticed in particular from Liz Sly, who's the Washington Post bureau chief in Beirut. She says, given that Iraqi troops in Ramadi resisted IS, Islamic State, for 17 months without help or leave, isn't Ash Carter being a bit unfair? Elsewhere, we've got this cartoon with the militant extremists rising from the grave as the Iraq army run off in the opposite direction. And also Michael Weiss, the senior editor at the Daily Beast, says this: a modest prediction, Ash Carter won't last the rest of the presidency.
So unguarded were the comments.
Yes, I mean, it is highly unusual, because in this day and age of diplomacy, where social media repeats everything so many times and you make one slip of the tongue and you know it will dog you for such a long period.
Although I beg to differ. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has said similar things in congressional testimony about the Iraqi army, especially after the fall of Mosul.
Well, the interesting thing is the next article I was going to look at is actually The Atlantic, where they did a very, very lengthy interview with Barack Obama. This was directly after the fall of Ramadi, just ahead of the fall of Palmyra. And in it, he talks a great deal about Iran and the nuclear deal. But in particular, with regards to Iraq, he is quoted as saying, if the Iraqis themselves aren't willing to fight for the security of their country, then we can't do it for them. Now, it's not as explicit as what was said by Ash Carter.
It's along the same lines.
Fundamentally, it's the same kind of idea, if you like. Now, the fact that this all played out very publicly means that the US has had to act very publicly in its wake. And so Joe Biden has been trying to patch things up, as they put it here in Politico. They say that basically he's smoothing the waters with Haider al-Abadi, and that there is a growing sense within the administration and beyond that Ramadi's loss is a major blow. Now, remember, Barack Obama was referring to it as a setback, it's not a blow. President Barack Obama is still resisting calls to deploy additional US troops to Iraq beyond those advising the Iraqi army, though, they point out. Now, the LA Times puts it in very colloquial terms. Joe Biden tries tries to buck up Iraqis, promises training and equipment. While Newsweek also takes a look at this story and says that the US really is trying to play down the idea now that all Iraqi forces are being seen as weak by the United States. The quote here was a senior official said Carter's mention of a lack of will was a reference specifically to the retreat in Ramadi, which followed a wave of suicide bombings and what the Iraqi government has acknowledged were breakdowns in military command and planning. So really trying to excuse what he came out with.
Emma James, look there at what's been said about tonight's, the theme of tonight's debate. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed to all of our guests for being with us in the studio, those who joined us from Cairo and from Washington. Thank you for taking part. That brings us to the end of tonight's France 24 debate. In just a moment, the news.